So we are going to go ahead and jump in. And if you haven't had a chance to introduce yourself yet, please go ahead and do so. And I'm going to invite people, as you would, to join us tonight. If you've been with us before, you are probably going to have logged into the website to be able to access the modules. And if it is a first time for you in doing so, you will sign up one time as a first time user. So this project is called Project Empower, and we offer this series as a free access professional learning opportunity for people to learn about how to design, implement, and work within comprehensive integrated three-tiered models of prevention. This is highly strategy-based. You don't have to have a tiered system in your context to be able to do this, but we're going to situate this for you in case you do. We are honored to have so many people from different locales and good friends and colleagues. So we are thankful for you to be here tonight to listen and learn a little bit about instructional choice. If you would, go to that tab, as I mentioned, as people are coming in and getting settled, and register yourself as a first-time user if you would like to share. And when you do that, it's going to give you a consent form that basically is letting you know that we're keeping track of what people access. And this is partly how we learn what is useful to you and what we can build and have in place for you. So tonight, what we are doing, we are going to talk about these two low intensity strategies, instructional choice and increased opportunities to respond. And we're going to be talking about how they can serve as part of a base foundation for every single student in your class. We're going to talk about how teachers can use those as a practical strategy delivered to everybody in their class, how to intensify it. If somebody happens to have a classroom where you have many kids that are struggling to maximize productive engagement and limit challenging behaviors, we're also going to talk about how to use them as a standalone intervention, as well as embedded in other parts of intervention packages. So as you are looking at this, when you get to the website, it might look something like this for you. So those are going to be where you're going to find the resources tonight. And you're going to find some other professional learning resources in the same location where you registered to be here today. So when you go on to that page, though, when you get to the enhanced website, you're going to see an entire array of resources that have been built over the last 5 years, thanks in large part to an amazing group of educators that we've been able to work with. It's been a partnership across 6 universities with many people that are close friends and colleagues, and literally over 720 teachers in the first year of this IES-funded grant gave us input on what they thought the world needed to be able to do these systems well to meet kids' multiple needs in an integrated fashion. At the beginning of the project, we thought we would build 8 modules, and you can see, and I'm watching Elise and Howard laugh. David is looking away. I'm hoping he's working on attendance and not just distressed. But we have this incredible group of people that have brought to life all these requests from different educators across the country. And tonight we're going to talk about 2 of those low intensity strategies here. But just so you're aware, you're welcome to use anything that's here. There's a bank of resources about serving as a leader within these integrated tiered systems. There's information specifically about behavior screening and an entire module focused on the student risk screening scale for internalizing and externalizing behaviors. And that was also funded by another IES project. You'll see the green represents a bank of resources to use at Tier 1, and the strategies that we're talking about today are in purple. So you'll see those low intensity strategies, and we're going to have time for you today to make some decisions about where you want to go in a breakout room to see what you want to learn. And then we're going to show you just here so that you know for future reference that there's also banks of resources for supporting Tier 2 interventions, Tier 3 interventions, as well as foundational things like why reinforcement and how applied behavior analysis is serving as the platform for which all this good learning is taking place, and importantly, the role of consequences. But tonight we're going to focus on those 2 strategies. When you walk into any of these modules, you are going to see that there's 2 big pieces to it. One is an ebook, which is like a little digital book that you can click through. My favorite cereal is Lucky Charms. I literally ate some this morning at about 3 a.m. because I couldn't quite make it to the breakfast time. And the favorite part of those cereals, of course, is what? What's the best part of Lucky Charms? Feel free to put it in the chat. Yes. Exactly. It is the charms. It is the marshmallows. Fantastic. We've got convergent validity happening in the chat. So in those marshmallows, I always think of these modules as having double marshmallows in the sense that you're going to find things like infographics and short little videos and resources that Mark and David are going to show you tonight. And those are things that you can literally take back and use in your own classrooms, or if you're people that like that work at a university, she might embed some of those in her instruction there. Or if those of you are technical assistance providers or principal leaders, you're welcome to use those. Elise came up with the idea for this infographic here to kind of explain how to use the modules. In addition to the ebook, there is also an interactive resource, but we wanted to make sure that you have a guide to kind of help you navigate how to use this. So if you get a little lost, you might start by checking back here. You're going to see there's a table of contents to use as a navigation pane. There's a little arrow you can click on the side, and that interactive resource, because we quickly learn from people. We actually made these ebooks and this thing that looks like a tricked out PowerPoint where it'll actually read it to you. And we said to people, how do you want it? How do you want it? Okay, that's a different song. But the question was, do you want to be able to read it or listen to it? And what was the answer? It was both. They're like, it's like food in a restaurant, like take two, they're tiny. So we actually made these accessible in multiple ways. And that has been a big praise from people that are using these resources. So while you are here tonight, I hope as a faculty, a staff, a university provider, a family member, a community member, we're glad that you're here. And these Empower sessions are one piece of this larger system that we have had the honor literally since the late 1990s. Actually, 1995 was the very beginning of when we dipped a toe into creating Ci3T. 1996 was the first year we launched it. And we began learning and growing together with literally thousands of teachers and hundreds of schools throughout the years. So we are happy to share with you what we've learned based on the input that we've received from educators. And the key is we wanted to make sure that we had things that were practical, but also really grounded in the research. We don't have enough time to do things that don't work. And in this day and age, when we're all committed to making sure that kids are enjoying positive, productive, and safe learning environments, we want to make sure that teachers have the tools that they need. So tonight, we are going to talk about these two low intensity strategies. We're going to talk about how they can be used at tier 1 with everybody, how they can be used as a standalone tier 2 intervention, as well as parts of tier 2 and parts of tier 3. The real show tonight is going to be Mark Buckman talking about instructional choice and David Royer talking about increased opportunities to respond. And then we're going to be listening throughout this whole thing about making sure 3 things are happening. If you decide to do these strategies in any one of those ways, 3 things we want to hang on to, especially board certified behavior analysts in the making or in practice. We want to make sure that we are monitoring implementation to know, is it happening as planned? We also want to make sure that before we do any interventions, we're getting input from those that are using them to find out, are they comfortable with the goals, the procedures, and the outcomes? That's the social validity piece. So this is where we're going, and you will have time to process and discuss in breakout rooms. We'll give you a little bit more instruction on that, and you'll have some planning time at the end. This is where you went to register for tonight, and I just want to remind you that many districts have put these professional learning opportunities in their own systems so that you can go and register for your district so that you can get the points. You will also need to make sure you're registering here with us so that you can hear from the marvelous Stacy Williams, who is calm as a cucumber, and she's the one that sends out all the communication and makes sure that the trains are running on time. So this is where we're working tonight, and we have 3 more after tonight. So let's talk about these strategies that we're talking about on deck tonight. One thing that I want to say, I'd like to give a shout out to the Institute of Education Sciences, the What Works Clearinghouse group, which was led by a whole wonderful team. The point of contact there was Brian, was the person that was running this whole process guide, if you would, this practice guide. And Tammy Becker, who might be on the call with us tonight, was also a key member of this. This just recently came out. There's a whole set of resources that spotlight practical teacher-delivered strategies that can be used in grades K through 5. And they're working on a 2nd edition right now about what to do when these base tier 1 type things are insufficient for some kids, like what to do next. But I wanted to highlight for you that part of what they recommended in this practice guide is things like offering choices and things like building increased opportunities for kids to respond. So what you're hearing tonight is not just a pet project of Ci3T and this research team. This is recommended in the most recent practice guide that is just published by What Works Clearinghouse. And that is a free guide. And Elise, thanks for putting in that in the chat. So you might might want to download that for later. And you'll see that there's this giant summary document, there's the full guide, and there's pieces that come within it. So again, keeping in mind that you're working across the tiers. So when we talk about working within an integrated system, back in the day, there used to be people that had tiered systems in their schools and in their districts, but oftentimes everything was siloed. So for example, you might see one team that's looking at academic data, another team that's looking at behavior data like office discipline referrals, and then you might have another team that's considering the well-being of students. In a Ci3T model, it puts it all together, because when somebody comes to your school, like if it's me, if Kathleen Lynn Lane, and I might have tier 1 needs for my academics, I might have tier 2 needs for my social skills. And those of you who know me, I know we're probably holding up 3 fingers right now, suggesting I could benefit from tier 3 support. But we want to make sure that in this model, teachers have what they need to create positive, productive, safe learning environments. And those earlier resources that I showed you do basically both sides of the gospel. They're teaching you how to create these classroom structures, and all of it is laid out in a Ci3T implementation manual. And I know David Royer runs multiple series to help people in different states to build these, to clarify what people need to know about the academics, the behavior, and the social and emotional well-being. And in that, we want to create those transparencies, not just about how to establish and teach expected behavior and how to use validated resources to level the playing field for kids in things like self-regulation, self-determined type behaviors, but also how to thread that together into the daily fabric of instruction. And even when you do that really well, there's going to be kids that have challenging behaviors, and that's okay. We want to make sure that every single teacher has something practical that they can do to respond when challenging behaviors occur that does not involve removing kids from the classroom. So when you think about that, I know like Allison and Elise have done lots of presenting recently in person. This is like one of the most downloaded modules that we have. Mark Buckman just finished leading an article that will go actually to you, Sarup, very shortly on February 1st. And as a part of this also, we want to make sure that people know this isn't a separate system between general ed and special education. Kids receiving special education services are accessing all these different levels of prevention. And in that module that you're looking on the far right, there's a whole thing to explain how that pre-referral intervention process. But basically the short story is we want to have all this detailed about what's happening for all, for some, for a few, and we want teachers to have immediate access to understand, here's what's being offered at my school. There was a great district partner that we had, and she did this great visual of a plate showing Ci3T is not one more thing on your plate. It is the plate, and everything that's inside of it is what you are serving to the community of students and their families that you're bringing into the building. And there's data to show that doing this in this integrated way, teachers are reporting lower rates of burnout and a higher sense of efficacy in their teaching, not in every domain, but in the majority of them. And even when this is all taught at tier 1, teaching expected behaviors that are defined by faculty and staff, giving opportunities to response, having one universal reinforcer, and explicit instruction of social and emotional well-being skill sets, coupled with high quality academic instruction, even with all that in place, there will still be kids that need more than tier 1 has to offer. And I want to say it a million times, it doesn't mean it's a bad teacher. It's not a tragedy. It's an expectation. And we want to make sure that we're all comfortable with that process of making sure that we know who needs tier 2 or who needs the most intensive level of support. And in this model, tier 2 is not the pre-referral intervention process. Tier 3 is not special education. This is for the entire community of learners. And to make this tick, if you would, those low intensity supports, David made this beautiful graphic several years ago of a toolbox. And you can think of all these strategies as additional tools that we're putting into a teacher's toolbox. Things like behavior-specific praise, pre-correction, increasing opportunities to respond, and instructional choice. The list goes on. There's 7 that we really highly encourage you to explore as research informed. And some of them meet the standards for evidence-based practices. But when you look at those strategies, the things you're going to learn tonight, some of it might be being a label on things you're already doing. Some of it might be like, oh, I hadn't really thought about that as something that could be multifaceted, like used for more than just this one group of kids. But literally, intentional use of instructional choice, that can be enough. There's studies done by Lee Kern, an incredible scholar, that have shown just offering kids choice of what do you want to do first, that for many kids, that in and of itself is enough. So tonight, though, you're going to learn how to use these in 3 different ways. How to do them at tier 1 for every single kid in your class. We're going to learn how to do them as a standalone tier 2 intervention. And then you're going to learn how to do it as part of a package, like part of a tier 2 or part of a tier 3. And one of the things that I love about what we get to share with you tonight is that oftentimes when you open up school Ci3T implementation manuals, these very strategies are listed. And they're listed in the academic column because by teaching teachers how to do this, this is how we integrate. So that Montel Jordan song of "This is how we do it," he was totally right. So we can support high levels of productive engagement by making sure that teachers know how to weave these throughout all the phases of instruction. So when you think about how to integrate, I'm going to share this with you, I think. Okay, you ready?
Embedding low-intensity supports in daily instruction. It's almost time for the reading block in Mrs. O's class. As she begins to transition her students to the carpet, she uses pre-correction to remind them of the Lincoln Lion expectations she wants to see.
Okay class, as you're moving to the rug for reading time, remember to show respect by going right to your square and keeping your voice at a level 1.
As she sends students off to their designated areas, Miss O actively supervises the transition by moving throughout the room and keeping an eye out for students who are following the expectations so that she can acknowledge them with behavior-specific praise.
Timmy, thanks for walking right to the carpet and sitting down. Sarah, looking good sitting crisscross applesauce in your own square. Thank you.
As she starts the lesson, Miss O uses pre-correction again to let her students know what she is looking for as they work.
Alright, as we begin to learn our vocabulary words of the week, I'm looking for students to give their best effort answering the questions asked. Please remember to exercise self-control also by raising your hand if you need anything and keeping your hands and feet to yourself. Let's get started.
Throughout the lesson, Miss O uses opportunities to respond with her students by having them hold up response cards to the questions she asks. She also uses pre-correction and behavior-specific praise to help them use the cards as desired.
Alright students, let's review our vocabulary words. I'll ask you a question and you will use your response cards to show me your answer. Once the question is asked, be responsible by keeping your response card in front of you when you show your answer. Okay students, hold up your green card when you hear the correct definition of the word habitat. A habitat is what an animal eats, the name of a baby animal, the natural home of an animal or plant. Oh, I saw a lot of green cards on that last one. That's right, habitat is a word we can use to describe the place where an animal lives in nature. For example, the habitat of an alligator might be a swamp, river, or lake. Hannah, thanks for staying in your square and holding your response card right in front of you for that question.
Embedding low-intensity strategies into daily instruction helps Miss O prevent challenging behavior from occurring and supports student engagement in the classroom.
I'd like everybody to give a shout out for Miss O. Well done, very done. And let's hear it from Mark Buckman. Nothing more painful than having to listen to yourself talk. You got it, Mark. So one thing we want to show you as you think about getting started with tier 2 and using these strategies, these modules were actually all funded initially by the Institute of Education Science, which was focused on an elementary project. We've had so much interest in the middle and high school levels that many of these now include pieces related to middle and high school. And we have another grant that's under review, and God willing, we are really hoping it funds, but it will actually be partnering with interested middle and high schools. We are going to be working with up to 12. There will be 8 middle schools and 4 high schools, and always taking partners that is going to actually continue to expand the illustrations and examples across the secondary level. So excellent question. So yes, there's some in there. And B, there will be more pending funding. But one of the tools that has been tested across this continuum is the use of this integrated lesson plan. So when people ask, like, how do I put this all together? Because years ago, people used to think I have to stop instruction to do the behavior. And I want to be very clear. We're not suggesting that we ask teachers to go fill out this integrated lesson plan for every lesson that they teach. This is more of an instructional tool that you can use in your professional learning context. So it might be, for example, that people start start by what they know. Like I put down, what do I want to accomplish in terms of my academic objective? And then at tier 1, when you're using like a validated resource and you're teaching explicitly at tier 1 for all kids, different social skills, this is a time to remind kids of those skills that they have received instruction on in the past and an opportunity to say how they're going to practice them in the future. So it might be, hey, do you guys remember when we had that whole conversation about empathy and really being able to show, show that you have this deep compassion for people? Or it might be, do you remember that whole thing we talked about having to listen to other people's ideas that might be different than your own and still being respectful? When we listen to this story today, or when you're in your small group, this is going to be a chance for you to practice that, as well as the behavioral expectation about what it looks like to be respectful or be responsible. Then off to the right, you see all those low intensity strategies that you just heard about in that video. So when working in this is like interfacing the facets of instruction with clear objectives, how they relate, and in all those strategies for teachers to use so that you can provide differentiated instruction for students. So it's taking the objectives plus those low intensity supports, and essentially you're pacing it out. And at the end of it, there's even a little space for teachers to say, here's what I used and what I tried. On our website and in those handouts, you're going to see examples of completed lessons. And in it, again, a lot of times people will do this with their faculty and staff to say, I want to walk through a couple examples with you, and I want to give you an opportunity to think about how you might focus on that integrated instruction. And when we say integrated, we're talking about weaving together the objectives with the use of those strategies. So in other words, how might I provide this really engaging instruction in a way that different people can access it? And a big part of making sure that it is relevant for the learners that you're serving is that they can connect it to their own life. So that opening activity is very important because you're going to help them to create the bridge to what they already understand. And then you'll move through the introduction and the modeling and the guided practice and the independent practice. And then there's the closing, so that we're making sure every kid walks out knowing what they learned and how it can be applicable in their daily life. Those X's represent a teacher's plan to when they're going to use different strategies, like when am I going to build in choice? When am I going to highlight the use of behavior-specific praise? If you feel like playing the school game, pop open your chat and you think about those strategies that we just heard about. Will you pop into the chat which those strategies you're already using in your repertoire of instruction? Which ones do you use most? Is it actively supervising? Is it behavior-specific praise? Is it building in choice? I'm going to give you about 15 seconds to think about that and pop it in the chat. And I want to thank everybody for being so chat active. Thank you for the yay. Feeling the praise. Wonderful. Behavior specific praise. Such a great thing. Telling kids exactly what you want to see more of, praising what's expected, not what's exceeded necessarily. Great strategies. And I'm seeing a lot of people use more than one. That's right. And for some adults, when you're sharing this information out, it's going to be validating. It's like, oh, I'm already doing that. So I might be thinking, yep, I'm really good on that one. And I might be needing to identify a target to grow in another area. And some of the work that we've done, I know David and Wendy and I back in the day, we did a study with the principal where she had it set up that every single person in her building was going to be a learner on one strategy and a coach on another. So in her building, like there was a group of people that were the go-to people for how to do instructional choice. And there's another group that were the go-to people for how to do pre-correction. And so that in there, you're capitalizing on everybody's talents. Wonderful. So as you're thinking about using those in your daily routines, I also want to show you that within Ci3T models, we have these things called intervention grids. The intervention grids are built by the school site's leadership team and partner with the district vision to make clear what are all the extra supports that are going to be done at tier 2 for kids that need more than tier 1 has to offer. So in this is an example of how you could use behavior specific praise as a tier 2 intervention. This grid names it, describes it, and then it shows you the school-wide data that you can look at to see who might benefit from a more targeted approach to behavior-specific praise. It doesn't mean you stop praising all the other kids, but if I was in Joni's class, she might think, ooh, looking at this, Kathleen could really benefit potentially from some higher rates of behavior-specific praise. And then anytime we put a kid into that extra intervention, then we are going to do 3 things. We're going to make sure it's happening. So I'm going to monitor treatment integrity. And before I start, I'm going to explain the intervention to the kid. It's not a secret. I will collaborate with the family family. I'll get their input on the goals, the procedures about and outcomes. And I'm going to collect information to see, and Joni might do it. Like for me, when I do this for Kathleen, does her engagement go up? Does her disruption go down? And there's a planned exit criteria for when to conclude it or start to fade it. So you'll see this from Mark and David tonight, that for every tier 2 intervention in these pages, you're going to find everything you need to do it. An implementation checklist to get it all organized, fidelity sheets to make sure it's happening as planned, the social validity to make sure that you're getting input from like the students, the family or caregiver people, and the students, the teachers themselves, as well as a plan for you to graph it so you know if it worked. So when you do this, also, you're going to see that there's a range of resources. So when you're like, for example, like thinking of a tier 2 or tier 3 support, like you might be doing functional assessment based interventions. And I know Elise, that's her baby. So for functional assessment based intervention, we want to detail the antecedent adjustments, the rates of reinforcement adjustments and extinction. Behavior specific PRAID is going to be front and center in a reinforcement adjustment. So you're going to see how that tool can show up over and over again. So as I mentioned several times now, you can use this as a standalone intervention for every single kid. You can use it as tier 1 practices. You can use it as a targeted tier 2. You can use it as part of a package. And as you're building the capacity of people to do it, you could use this as a standalone professional learning experience. You can take this video, or you could go do a book study like David did with a principal. You could build it into a professional learning community. Some people just simply email these things out and do independent module explorations. And some people do a great job of building on-site experts to make it happen. So they determine like who in their building is going to go learn how to do it. We will have 3 conversation points tonight. This is the first one. In just a moment, Stacy's going to open a breakout room and you're going to go meet a new friend. Use your very best social skills. Turn on your videos, please, and go enjoy this first conversation with your coach.
All right, so we're going to talk about instructional choice, which I think is one of the most important in low intensity strategies because it has a lot of implications for things beyond just managing challenging behavior. Giving kids opportunities to make choices in the classroom is a really critical consideration for helping kids to feel autonomous in the classroom, to feel competent, to make a choice, stick with it, live with positive consequences and whatnot. It's a really, really critical skill, choice making. And so it gives you an opportunity to build that in for students. But we also have some things we want to think about to use choice in a specific way to hopefully make it as effective as possible. And so those are some of the details that we're going to get into tonight. So with this being our first low intensity strategy, just to kind of give you a framework for thinking about how this can be used and what we're going to be talking about. So everything that we present here tonight is part of the module on instructional choice, which you can access on the Enhance website. I will certainly give you a hand to get there if you need any help. So the materials that you're seeing aren't just part of this presentation. They're also things that you can download and share out with people or use for your own practice as you like. So what we're going to do is talk about what instructional choice is, how it can be used as a tier 1 component. So just something that you're using in the classroom as part of your normal instruction. We'll also talk about how it can be embedded into tier 2 and tier 3 interventions. And we'd also encourage you to take what you're hearing here tonight. And if you think it could be useful to a colleague or could be shared out with your whole faculty and staff, just know that that module is made as a tool to kind of take things like this, events like this, and help you to scale this up at your school. So if this is something that you wanted to focus on with your colleagues, by all means, take what you learn here tonight and share it with anybody in your school that might benefit from that. So you can even think about yourself as a trainer or a coach. Now, also, as we get through the first part of our presentation, which kind of covers the what and the why and the how, you're going to have a talk time where you actually get to choose how you want to engage with these materials. So you might choose to do some planning for how you could use these materials for your tier 1 instruction, or you could think about a student who maybe you would want to use this strategy with. We can start that process of building this out as a tier 2 intervention. So just know that we're going to go from kind of this like, what is this? How does it look, in the classroom, to a more application piece here tonight. So let's start off with a quick video. And again, this video is embedded in the module, so it's certainly something that you can return to as you like.
What is instructional choice? Instructional choice is when a teacher provides students with 2 or more options for ways they can interact with the environment, materials, activities, or classroom content. Students can select their preferred option for the choices provided by the teacher. Instructional choice is very flexible and can be used at each level of prevention. At Tier 1, instructional choice is one of several proactive, evidence-based strategies used to support students' active engagement. For students who may need additional supports, Instructional choice can also be used as a standalone Tier 2 intervention, can be embedded into existing Tier 2 interventions, or can be included as a component of a Tier 3 intervention. There are many ways to use instructional choice. Typically, instructional choices can be considered as falling within two categories: across-activity choices and within-activity choices. Across-activity choice is when the student can choose what task to engage in, such as selecting one option from a menu of choices for how they will demonstrate their knowledge, or choosing the order in which they will complete tasks. Within-activity choice is when the student can choose how to complete a task, such as the materials they will use, or where or when they will do the work. Examples of across-activity choices include choice of ways to demonstrate knowledge, choice of which activity to complete first, choice of learning center, and choice of daily schedule. Examples of within-activity choices include choice of writing utensil, choice of where to complete work, choice of book to read, choice of which problems or questions to complete, and choice of how to complete an assignment. Thank you for watching. Please visit ci3t.org for more information and additional resources.
As you saw in that video, choice really is as simple as that. We're going to find ways to embed opportunities for students to make choices in our classroom. But with that as a starting point, there's a lot of different directions we could go with that, maybe steps along the way that we want to consider. So as we kind of go through this next section, we'll break down some of the more important things that you would want to think about as you're planning this out for your classroom. So let's take a look at this quick infographic. Again, largely focused just sort of on setting up the terminology. But as we heard in that video, instructional choice is about providing students with options for ways they can interact with their classroom environment. And the two big different categories are within activity and across activity. So we'll dig into that here in just a minute. And then as you're thinking about how do I actually make this work? What are the critical components involved? We have a step-by-step checklist. There are 9 steps for instructional choice, and it's broken down into very simple, discrete steps, some of which are so simple that there's really not a whole lot to say about this. But it's really nice to know that there's a very clear roadmap for you to consider as you're learning this and getting comfortable with using choice. So this infographic is going to itemize each of those steps, and I'm not going to read those to you right now because we'll actually talk through each of those here in the coming minutes. So we'll circle back to that in just a moment. Let's start by digging into this idea of across activity choices and within activity choices. I don't think these are the only dimensions to think about choice. I think there's other things that we want to think about too, but it's a really helpful starting point just if you're trying to generate ideas for like, okay, what are potential options for things I could give my students to choose? Thinking about it in terms of like tasks is a really great place to start. So across activity choices are where you're literally letting the student choose different things that they could do. I love across activity choices, especially when you think about how this relates to something like universal design for learning. You can use this in a very specific and narrow fashion, or you can go big and even include like different assessment opportunities so that you really are giving kids a lot of autonomy, that they can make a choice that's motivating to them, that's interesting to them, that aligns with their interests. So there's a lot of opportunity with across activity choices where kids really can have a lot of freedom, and that's really nice. But that's also a little intimidating too, because when you have across activity choices, if you have 2 different assignments a kid can do, that means you have to have 2 different ways to grade it. You may have to make 2 different rubrics. And that can be maybe a little bit of a limitation. Doesn't mean you shouldn't do it, but does mean maybe not every choice that you provide is going to be that across activity type. Having within activity choices to choose from are also really beneficial because these are much easier to offer and easier for the student to make. So this could be something as simple as like, what kind of writing tool do you want to use for your assignment? Maybe you could let kids choose pencil or pen. Maybe you give them an opportunity to choose where in the classroom they're going to do their activity. They could sit at their desk or they could sit in the cozy corner. And these just little tiny opportunities for autonomy really can go a long way to helping kids be more motivated to start their work. And it can just take one opportunity for maybe a little bit of challenging behavior to come out of the equation because, hey, I'm not going to fight you on what tool to use on this assignment. In fact, I'm going to encourage you to make a choice that's going to make you feel like you're happy and motivated to do this right now. So those within activity choices are great things to keep in your back pocket. And this infographic that you're seeing right now gives you a bunch of opportunity to just kind of go back and think about some of the classic ways that you can break down that within and across activity choice dichotomy. Okay, so let's take a minute to open up your chat, and I would like for you to maybe give us an idea in the chat of some across activity choices that you have used before or might use in your classroom, or some within activity choices. So you can choose whichever way you'd like to go, but do label your chat with within or across activity choices. I like Howard's idea. He's bringing choice to the faculty and staff. I love that. Ooh, I like his idea. That's like going real big on choice, like offering a different way to assess knowledge. But that is an incredibly powerful way to help kids feel competent and autonomous by giving them, that choice to do their work in a medium that's most interesting to them. That's great. Ooh, choice of math tools. I love that. That's a good idea. It's a good within choice activity. Work with a partner or independently. That's a classic. Choice in subtopics. I like that so much because if you're doing content instruction on something where you're learning to write, say, a persuasive argument, it's not the topic of the argument that's important. It's the structure or the way that they construct the argument. And so giving students an opportunity to choose a topic that's interesting to them is an incredible way to get them to be more engaged in the skill that you're actually trying to help them learn. That's a great idea. Okay, love the chat. If you're seeing things that come through that you're like, I should think about remembering that when I'm planning choice, feel free to write it down or copy it into a Word document. Okay, so as we go on to the next section, let's talk about conceptualizing choice, not just as something that we're doing in the classroom for all students, but also something that we can do with a specific student in mind. So what you're looking at right now are intervention grids for tier 2, both for the elementary level and for the middle and high school level. If you are familiar with intervention grids, fantastic. If not, let me give you just a brief primer. If you're working in a school that's implementing Ci3T, you likely have a Ci3T implementation manual that documents your entire Ci3T plan. And one small part of that plan, probably towards the end, is going to be a list of tier 2 and tier 3 interventions that are each listed in grid form that name what the intervention is, a short description of it, some data that you might look at to decide whether a student could benefit or not from that intervention, some data sources that you could progress monitor, and some way to know when that student might exit from the intervention. Now, you might be able to look at a grid like this and say, hey, I want to do that for a student. That wouldn't necessarily give you everything you need to go and implement it, but you definitely have people in your school that you could connect with to help you implement interventions like this. And by coming to a session like this tonight, hopefully this is going to give you the sort of the initial comfortability to be like, hey, I could give this a shot with a student. And if you try it with somebody in your class and you have success, you could become someone in your school that other people come to help, get some ideas and strategies and structure for trying this out as well. So this, congratulations on being here tonight, because it's a really good first step to potentially kind of becoming someone that people could rely on to help do tier 2 and tier 3 intervention work. Fancy that. So why are we talking about tier 2 and tier 3? Well, all low intensity strategies have potential to be not just a tier 1 technique, but something that can be used as a standalone tier 2 intervention, or potentially as a component of a tier 2 or tier 3 intervention. And what that means, I'll go into in a little bit more depth in just a moment. But I do want to just make a plug first that if you're thinking that you need to do a little extra support for a student, maybe you're thinking about tier 2, or if you're thinking about a student that needs quite a bit of additional support, maybe you're thinking about tier 3, whatever we're going to do to support that student, we'd like to collect a little bit of data to make sure that what's going on is actually going to work for that student. And so the 3 big things that we would encourage you to think about are treatment integrity. Are I actually implementing this intervention? And in this context, you're basically saying, did I actually remember to follow the steps to implement choice? Did I offer the choices? Did I let the students make a choice and stick with it? That's treatment integrity. Social validity is whether the kids feel like the choices that they're provided are meaningful for them and whether they like having those choices. That's social validity. And then whether the outcomes that you're finding after you've given more choice is actually what you're seeking. So if you're looking for kids to complete their work more often, for example, you could just collect a little data to say, what's their work completion look like before I started giving choices? And what does it look like after I've started giving choices? Now, as soon as I said data collection, I didn't see anybody just slam their computer down, or close their screen or anything like that. So I'm taking that as a good sign. But if the word data gives you any like PTSD or anxiety, I want to just let you know that inside this module, there's an entire section that has all the forms that you would need to collect these data. They're already pre-populated for you, so you wouldn't really have to do too much to collect data like this. And also an explanation of like, what do these words mean? Why are they important? And what would I do with the data when I've got it? So I'm not going to say it's just, hey, easy peasy, no problem, but it does give you everything that you would need to learn this process. And I think any of these data that you can collect are a net positive over collecting no data at all. So I would encourage you to not let perfection get in the way of just giving it a shot. Give it a shot. And if you're looking for some data collection tools, we'd be happy to show you what those look like in this module. So the tools, those data collection forms, you're looking at a couple of pictures of those. On the left, the treatment integrity checklist is just like literally one page that you would print off for the week. It gives you Monday through Friday as columns, and it gives you each of the steps for choice. And you would just, at the end of the day, you would circle, hey, did I do that all the time? Did I do it some of the time? Did I forget to do that? And you can kind of give yourself like a little score. It's sort of a self-monitoring form for your own implementation. And if you ever have like a student improvement team, general education intervention, or something like that, where you wanted to try choice as one of the interventions, you will blow minds if you show up to those meetings with one or two of these checklists filled out to be like, hey, I tried instructional choice and I did it with fidelity for 2 weeks. And here's what that looked like for me. I swear you'll make people fall out of their chair. So if you're into that, definitely take a look at those forms. We've also got some social validity data collection sheets that you can use to ask students questions about what they think about what they think about choice. I'm going to talk more about where that falls into this sort of step-by-step process for implementing instructional choice. But basically, it just gives you a structured way to have a conversation with students to be like, hey, does this seem like a good idea to help you finish your work more often or to feel more motivated at school, whatever that might be. And then we also have a place that you could graph some potential data. So again, whatever behavior you're hoping to increase or decrease, we've got some tools that make it really, really easy for you to chart your progress over time. Okay, what does instructional choice look like as a component in a tier 2 intervention? So choice is wonderful. It's very simple to implement and potentially pretty powerful. But as you maybe think about students that have, not like really intense behavior challenges, but they struggle at school. Maybe they struggle to do their work when independent work time comes. Maybe they struggle to, be respectful to peers and adults, whatever it might be. And you might say, okay, choice seems like a good idea, but I'm not sure that choice by itself is enough. And you might be right. So you might look and say, okay, what are my tier 2 options? One tier 2 option that's really, really great is behavior contracts. And I'm not going to get all the way into what behavior contracts are, but you might collaborate with someone at your school that's really good at doing behavior contracts. It's essentially you coming to an agreement with the student and maybe a parent to say, hey, if they can meet this goal, maybe they're going to finish their work with 90% accuracy for an entire week. If they can meet this goal, then they're going to get some reward. Okay, that's great. And that behavior contract might be focused on math work. Now, what can we do to help the student during math, not only to be more successful during their instruction, but maybe even more successful to meet this goal as part of the behavior contract? Maybe we say, okay, we know we're focusing on math. We know we have this behavior contract in place to hopefully help out, but I'm going to go a little above and beyond. And I'm also going to add additional opportunities for the student to make choices during math time when I know they struggle to complete their independent work. I'm going to go to that student and make sure that they know they do not have to finish that whole sheet. They can choose even or odds. And I'm going to make sure that they know that they can choose where they'd like to sit while they do their math work, right? Maybe that seems like almost too simple, like it's sort of intuitive, like, oh yeah, I can give them some additional extra choices. But we'd encourage you to really think about what that means. You're taking 2 effective practices and stacking them on top of each other. And in doing so, I think you're going to really increase the opportunity that you're going to be able to see some improvements in that student's behavior, because we're really being proactive and mindful about that student's needs by stacking those interventions on top of each other like that. So as you're learning this instructional choice skill, if you're thinking, hey, this is a great idea, I'm not sure it's really enough to help some of the kids that maybe are struggling in my class, we just want you to kind of start putting it in the soup, right? This is going to be one of the techniques that you're going to have at your disposal, and think about how you can mix and match it with other things as well. Similarly, when you think about a student with really intensive behavior needs, one of the most effective practices that's out there for kids that have really intense behavior needs is called functional assessment-based intervention. You may not be someone that's going to go and do a functional assessment-based intervention all by yourself. That's probably something you're going to collaborate with a team of people at your school to do for kids that have behavior challenges that might have some components of aggression, elopement, things that are really concerning. And that functional assessment behavior intervention is basically going to be collecting a bunch of data to figure out, hey, when do we anticipate problems are going to happen and why do those behavior problems happen? But then once you've done all the data collection and you start thinking about the actual intervention for a functional assessment-based intervention, you have to start compiling different things that you can put into the soup to help that kid relative to the data that have been collected. And oftentimes, really small interventions like instructional choice become really important. Because if you're like, okay, we know this kid sometimes engages in aggressive behavior. And if we follow the chain all the way back to the beginning of the that led us to that aggressive behavior, it's like, oh, when we ask him to do his math assignment, it starts off a chain of events that the conclusion of that is this really explosive behavior. And so we're not going to say that instructional choice is the intervention to address this problem, but we're going to put instructional choice right up front and center. That's like one of the first things that we're going to do. We think about that as called an antecedent. It's basically something we can put into the environment that's going to reduce the likelihood of the challenging behavior and increase the likelihood of the desired behavior. And basically, it gives us one more tool in the toolkit when we're trying to compile some sort of really intensive intervention. And to bring us all the way back to like, why are we here today? We're here to learn instructional choice as a tool that we can use in all of our classrooms. But we're also here knowing that if I can master this technique, it gives me the opportunity to put it to use for so many other students in so many other contexts, because then when we're talking about, oh man, we need a really good tier 3 functional behavior assessment for this student, what components can we pull into play? You as the classroom teacher or you as the special education teacher can say, hey, I know how to use instructional choice. And I think that's one of the things that we can put into that plan. So definitely thinking about this sort of across those multiple dimensions of how this can be used, I think is really helpful. And hopefully that's motivating to you to know like, oh, there's a bunch of different use cases that we can use here. Okay, so hopefully that wasn't too abstract. Let's get back into the concrete. How do we do instructional choice effectively? Well, we've got a step-by-step process that's going to walk us through. So the first step in instructional choice is to brainstorm the different types of choices that you feel comfortable offering to students in your classroom and create a menu of choices. This is really important because I like to improvise. I like to come up with things on the fly, and improv is really good in the classroom when it works, but a lot of instructional choice requires planning. If I'm going to offer across activity choices, and I do believe that across activity choices are necessary in a lot of cases for this to be really, really effective, I've got to be prepared. I need to know what those choices are. I need to make sure I have the material set up. I need to make sure I have the directions ready to give to the students as well. So there's some planning we need to do to make sure we kind of have an idea for like, what are the choices I'm willing to give in this context? And if you're doing instructional choice for the whole class, then you're thinking about, hey, I know my lesson is on this today or this unit coming up. Here are some choices that I can plug into that unit. And if you're thinking about instructional choice for a specific student, great. You might also consider that student's skill level, their interests, their preferences, and use those like individual features also to help you brainstorm. Because if you offer a really complex choice or something that doesn't give maybe something that's interesting to the student, that choice probably isn't really going to get off the ground, right? So we definitely want to keep those student individual considerations in mind. Okay, so first step, come up with a menu of choices. The second step is to use that menu to determine which choices you're going to provide during a particular lesson. So here we're slotting maybe the whole selection of options into a specific lesson. And if you're using something like an integrated lesson plan, all the better. You can really get very granular about like, okay, when am I going to embed these choices into the lesson? This is sort of the planning step. Now, as we go to step 3, this is basically you, as you've planned to do, offering the established choices. So some of these I feel like a little funny talking about because they're very like, okay, you came up with the choices. Now ask the student what they want to do. But it's a really good reminder to be like, all the planning in the world is great, but you got to be ready to step into the classroom and really figure out what is this going to look like when I offer the choices. So definitely prepping some materials sometimes can be helpful. This material that you're looking at here is a tic-tac-toe choice board that is a template that you can download from the website. And so this is one cool way that you can actually create a permanent product that represents the different choices that students might have during an activity. So getting creative, not just on what the choices are, but how to represent them is pretty cool. And we would encourage you to think about visuals across the grade span. Visual supports can be really, really important for helping people to understand what's expected of them. It's one of the reasons why you have those expectation posters in your classrooms, because it gives something that people can like visually hang their hats on, like, okay, I know where to look to find this information. So as you're thinking about how to offer the choices to students, definitely think about some visual supports like this tic-tac-toe board. Okay, step 4, ask the students to make their choice. Great. Okay, so now we're in granular territory. You prepared for how you're going to ask them, and now you're asking them. So B, would you like to use a pen, pencil, or gel pen to complete your writing prompt? Now, as you're thinking about this step, like I said, very simple to do, but you do want to keep in mind what you're trying to accomplish and who you're talking to. So if you're thinking about doing this as a tier 2 intervention, or how to embed this as part of a tier 2 or tier 3 intervention for a specific student, the way that you ask the student to make a choice is really, really important. If you have a student that's sensitive to feeling like they're being called out in front of the class, you do not want to make this request of the student to make a choice in front of the whole class unless the whole class is making that choice, right? So you want to be prepared to individualize or not based on who you're talking to and the sort of the context of what you're trying to accomplish. So as you're thinking about step 4, how to ask, those are some of the things that you'd want to think about. Step 5 is a really, really important one and surprisingly difficult. It's to provide wait time for the students to make their choice. Some students, they don't need much time. You give them a choice, they make it, they go. Some people are a little bit indecisive, and some people need time to really chew on their options and ask questions. So we want to make sure that we're honoring the students really giving some thought to what they want to do, even if the choice is pretty lightweight, not very high stakes. Where do I want to work? You still want to give them an opportunity to really think about that. Now, that said, you also need to be prepared to do some limit setting. So you can't let a kid take 30 minutes to decide whether they're going to do evens or odds, because then they've used their entire time to make a choice instead of to do their work. So sometimes you can embed something like pre-correction to say, okay, I'm going to give you a few minutes to make your choice. If you haven't made your choice by this time, then here's going to be your default option, right? Be prepared to facilitate maybe some kids that are a little bit slower to make that choice, but definitely allow enough time for them to give it its due consideration. Consider whether you're going to be willing to let students change their minds. I think sometimes it's very reasonable for somebody to start some one way and be like, actually, I regret my choice. Can I change my mind? And sometimes that's fine. And sometimes maybe that's less fine. Again, as much as you can do beforehand to let kids know what the expectations are around making the choice, all the better. Okay, step 6, listen to the student's response. Really important to do this step, because the next step is to actually give the student a choice. And if you're not sure what choice they made, or ready to give them any feedback or make sure that they understand what they're choosing, it's going to be hard to finish the process. So make sure that you're kind of paying attention to students. And if you're focused in on 1 or 2 kids, you want to make sure that your attention is duly sort of focused on those students where maybe they're more the focal point here. And then the step 7 is to prompt the student to make a choice if they haven't made a choice. So think about how you want to give reminders to the student. If they're struggling to make that choice, or maybe taking too long of a time, maybe you need to boil it down to just like yes or no, or A or B. So preparing yourself to kind of help the kid make a choice when they're stuck is really important. And this is a good opportunity to point out that you don't want to get really complex choices that are very indecisive, because that will make it all the harder for them to kind of get to that choice. So hopefully for kids, you kind of know your students and you'll give them choices within a certain set of parameters that make it a little bit easier for them to choose something that's going to be good for them. And then the second to last step is going to be to reinforce the student's choice by providing them with what they've selected. It can be really damaging if you give people a choice and then they make a choice and then you take it away from them. I don't think that you would do that on purpose, but every once in a while, circumstances may conspire to make a certain choice less desirable for you, the teacher. And then when the student has made that choice, you have sort of seller's regret and you're like, oh, I wish they hadn't chosen that choice. And unfortunately, once you've offered the choice, you really need to stick with it, because taking it away sort of pulls the rug out underneath the student and yourself. So it's, again, that's why all the planning that goes into this is really important, to make sure that you're only offering things that you're comfortable actually providing. And if you have students that struggle with decision making, you might even consider throwing in additional reinforcement opportunities. It seems a little bit funny to maybe give a ticket or behavior specific praise to students for engaging in something that was set out to be a benefit for them anyways. So if you were to say, Susie, thanks for making a choice so quickly, and then provide her with a ticket, maybe that seems silly, but I actually think it's really important that we reinforce choice making, especially for kids that might be a little bit more indecisive, because again, we're reinforcing behaviors that are healthy for the student. Choice making is an important behavior. And so why not honor that and acknowledge it as well? Okay, last step is going to be to offer students opportunities to provide feedback on the choices that they selected. So I mentioned social validity earlier. Social validity is just sort of a fancy way of saying, how do the people participating in this intervention feel about it? And the student is a really important person here, because we want to get their input on the choices that they've been provided, because there may be a really obvious and really desirable choice that's just hanging out there that you never would have thought of. And without talking to the student and getting their ideas and feedback, it sort of takes that opportunity away from you to give them something that they're really going to want, that's a totally good choice for them to make. So we do have the social validity questionnaire that's available inside the module. It's easy to find in the table of contents. You can just download it. We're researchers, so we love numbers. So I think it's a great idea to actually fill this out with the student, but at the very, very least, use these questions as a basis to have a conversation with them, to make sure that you give them the opportunity to have their voice heard as you're proceeding through this process. So as we're moving through sort of the next steps here, we do just want to give a plug that inside the module, we have a bunch of additional resources that you could use if you love choice making and wanted to share it with maybe even students' families. If you're a special education teacher or a teacher who has parents coming to you sometimes and saying, I'm struggling with my child during homework time, for example, it would be a great idea to help that parent think about how they can use choice making at home. And if that's of interest to you, we've got videos that you can share. We've got parent-friendly infographics and a practice guide that all can be downloaded and shared at your will. So if that's something that comes up in your practice that you wish you had resources on, just know that those are there for you as well. Now, as we're getting closer to the talk time where you'll get a chance to do some planning, know that the goal tonight is for you to get knowledge about what choice is, and hopefully through, something I've said, helped you kind of get closer to feeling like, hey, I have an idea for how this works. Now you're going to prepare to apply it. So the hope is that you're going to walk out of here tonight ready tomorrow or next week to use instructional choice to support your tier 1 instruction or a student maybe with tier 2 needs. So we're going to get you familiar with the module and all the materials that you would need to do that. And hopefully to also assess impact, because it's good to know whether behavior change efforts that you're engaging in are having the desired effect. And so we have tools inside the module to help you gather some data in that regard. And if you're really ambitious and really in need of some PD points, if you're in Kansas, there are even opportunities for you to earn bonus points for showing evidence that you have applied strategies that you learned during professional development, and even more bonus points for showing that it made a positive impact on a student. And if that's something that's of interest to you, definitely contact us. All of our emails are found pretty easily through our pre-session communication, because we'd be happy to work with you to make sure that you have everything you need to engage in that if you're interested in submitting those materials for bonus points. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. You are going to have 20 minutes right now. You're going to have the chance to choose, because, we talked about instructional choice. Let's build in some choice into our own presentation. You get to choose what breakout room you're going to go to. You'll have the opportunity to choose a room that's focused on module exploration, where it's completely unstructured, minimal facilitation. We're just going to make sure that you can get into the module, find the materials, and then it's up to you to kind of decide where you want to go with that. If that's your choice, totally fine. If you'd like a more facilitated experience, you can go to the room that's going to focus on using instructional choice as a component of tier 1 instruction. Or if you're interested in using instructional choice as more of a tier 2 intervention, there's a room for that as well. And then lastly, there's a room that you can go to focus on if you're thinking about how to scale up professional development at your school or district to train other people how to do this intervention. So if you view yourself more in the trainer or coach role, there's a room for you to go to as well.
All right. Welcome back, everybody. We're going to continue on with strategy number 2, which is opportunities to respond. This is definitely one of my favorite strategies. I was a high school teacher for 8 years, and it was wonderful to be able to keep students engaged by giving them lots of opportunities to respond, not just calling on the one student at a time where that only the one student has the chance to respond and be engaged. And meanwhile, what's everybody else doing? Of course, they're off task. Of course, they're getting into some challenging behavior or something that I didn't want them to get into at that time when I'm trying to teach. So we're going to cover opportunities to respond, another one of the low intensity strategies. Keep in mind as I present these materials that when I get to the end, you'll have another breakout room and be thinking about, do you want to spend time exploring the module, discussing using opportunities to respond as a component of Tier 1, as a Tier 2 standalone intervention, or talk with others as a trainer or a coach who will provide instruction on opportunities to respond to schools and faculty and staff. So think about that so you know where you might want to head when we get to that point. We're going to first start with this short video to walk us through, and this video is featured in the module, so you'll be able to share it with people and with your faculty and staff, and we'll take a look here with us.
Increasing opportunities to respond is an easy-to-use teaching strategy for managing behavior while enhancing whole class, small group, or individual instruction. Just as the term implies, opportunities to respond offer students frequent opportunities within a set time period to respond to teacher questions or prompts about a targeted academic, behavioral, or social skills material. Increased opportunities to respond is a very flexible strategy that is ideal with materials or concepts a student has a basic understanding of, with the goal of increasing fluency and information retrieval. Opportunities to respond help students review material, acquire skill fluency, commit information to memory, and increase on-task behavior. Opportunities to respond can be used at each level of prevention within the Ci3T framework. At Tier 1, opportunities to respond are one of several proactive, evidence-based strategies to support students' active engagement. For students who may need additional supports, opportunities to respond can be used as a standalone Tier 2 intervention. Increased opportunities to respond can also be embedded within other Tier 2 interventions, such as a math computation intervention, or as part of a more intensive Tier 3 intervention. To implement increased rates of opportunities to respond, teachers should aim to provide students with 3 or more opportunities to respond per minute. Students are expected to reply quickly, and teachers provide immediate feedback regarding the accuracy of the student's response. Given the quicker pace, this strategy will be most successful if the material or concepts have already been taught, such that students have a basic understanding and can fully engage with the material. Students can be provided with opportunities to respond either verbally or non-verbally, and individually or in unison. In the classroom, verbal responding is probably most familiar to us. The teacher poses a question and the student provides an oral response. The teacher can also preface the question by saying, "This question is for everyone," to indicate this will be a choral response where students are expected to respond together in unison, or "This question is for Emily," to involve a single student. Oftentimes, teachers will be prepared for a mixed approach, with some questions being for the full group and other questions for individual students. When increasing opportunities to respond through nonverbal responding, the teacher may ask all students to respond in unison through either a gesture or a written response. When questions can be answered with a yes or no, the simplest form of nonverbal choral responding is to use a hand gesture, such as a thumbs up to indicate yes and a thumbs down to indicate no. When questions have multiple possible answers or are open-ended, choral responding can occur using response cards. Response cards are reusable cards that students can hold up to show their answer to a question. With closed-ended questions, it is possible to use pre-made response cards that correspond to the possible answers, such as a card that goes with A, B, C, or D for multiple choice. Or students may be provided with individual whiteboards on which to write their responses. There are also ways to use technology to make choral responding more efficient. Student response systems allow all students to respond electronically through a clicker, phone, or computer, and then the data are submitted to the teacher, who can quickly monitor both individual and group level understanding. Regardless of the mode for responding, the goal is a rapid pace of at least 3 questions per minute. Thanks for watching. Please visit ci3t.org for more information and additional resources.
Okay, so that's your introduction to opportunities to respond, and you saw the different ways you might be able to do it, verbal or nonverbal, and the opportunity for 3 per minute might seem like a lot, but I'm going to give you some tips and when that's appropriate, and how opportunities to respond can just be your regular strategy that you incorporate through the whole day. And at that point, it's just what you do. It's what good teaching is. So it may not be the 3 per minute. For the 3 per minute we're going to talk about is when you're doing a designated time period for review of some material, for example. What you see on your screen are some infographics that are in the module that are easily shareable with your faculty and staff. So you can download those, you can print them and put them in teacher mailboxes, or post them in the teacher lounge, or email them out, and along with the link to the Project Enhance page where they can see all the modules, and so they can explore more about opportunities to respond as well as other strategies. So let's take a look. You heard it in the video, but let's see what the infographics say and learn more in-depth information about OTR. So it's, of course, when the teacher offers that frequent chance to interact. And the more opportunities I have to respond, the more engaged I am, the less likely I am to be off task or not paying attention if I'm being asked to do things, to be participatory. It's also, having worked with the young adolescents at the high school level, there's less opportunities for them to say, I'm bored, because you can't be bored if you're doing things. So the more opportunities I could provide to the whole class, all at once especially, or there's some ways to do it for half the class at a time and switch half to half, or occasionally throwing in with individuals, so mixed choices there with whole class, half and half, or individuals. So I want to do that to keep them engaged, so I can work on across domains, academic, behavior, and social skills, keeping them actively with me. Of course, doing that improves classroom behavior, because there's no opportunity. If they're engaged with me with all those opportunities, they can't get off task. We're going to look at these 8 steps in more depth, so stay tuned for those. But basically, you want to decide when are you going to offer opportunities to respond, prepare your list of questions that you're going to pose, decide how you're going to do it and how the students are going to respond, and listen for the response, provide instructional feedback, and then ask them what they thought of it. So again, whole group, could be small group, could be half the class at a time, or individualized. As you heard in the video, we got verbal opportunities to respond. These are the most common, I would say, because you can quickly ask the class to respond back to you. So if I'm reviewing some information that we learned for California history, and we were learning about the Golden Gate Bridge, and I could ask them, what year did it open? And I could even say the answer the first time. What year did it open? 1937. What year? And I've got some signal to the class to tell them, like, this is a core response. I want everybody to say it back. And this is something I've taught explicitly, so they know. So the Golden Gate Bridge opened in 1937. What year? 1937. Great. What year? I might even do it twice, just to get it in their memory a couple extra times. And I could go on with my list of questions that I've prepared. So that'd be verbal, whole class, choral responding. And occasionally I might call on an individual student just to mix it up. So for example, I might have a stack of tickets using our universal reinforcement system, our PBS Ci3T tickets, and I've got 1 ticket per person in the class, so my designated class set of tickets. And I pull one at a time to call on a student, so there's some equity that everybody gets a chance. So the times when I do want to offer the question to one person or hear one person's response, maybe it's an open-ended question, then I can call on that student. Kind of like popsicle sticks, but I'm trying to incorporate and use that universal reinforcement system all the time for my standard procedures throughout class. The other thing I like to say for the choral responding, I do kind of a hybrid with my class. I would do like think, pair, shares. So it's maybe not a question that I just want people to repeat because it's not something short, but it's something I do want to keep everybody engaged with. And if I just called on one person, that wouldn't keep enough people engaged. But if I say, think about this for 10 seconds, and then partner A, partner B, we've already determined who that is in my class. Partner A, tell partner B what year the Golden Gate Bridge started construction. Okay, now partner B, talk about how many people fell off the bridge but were saved by the ingenious netting system that they had. And there's a quick discussion there, and we've got procedures to get them back on task, of course, as I continue the review or the lesson if I'm doing instruction. And then, of course, there's nonverbal opportunities to respond. Thumbs up, thumbs down are really quick for yes, no, true, false. Response cards with multiple choice, A, B, C, D. I also taught my students the sign language for A, B, C, and D. So if I didn't have time to pass out the cards or I forgot to, we could quickly just say, show me with your hands, as well as you can do numbered responses, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 with your hand, or 10 or something. And if you're fancy enough to have the technology to do so, there's some great clicker systems out there where every student has a clicker to indicate their response. And of course, now if students are allowed to have their cell phones, you can do things like Kahoot and other online systems with that. So take a moment, if you would, and put in the chat, how have you been using opportunities to respond, either in your current lessons or daily routines, or if you haven't, what opportunities do you see to start integrating OTR into your lessons or routines? Share some tips, some successes, or some ideas that you might have in the chat. Whiteboards are great. Yes, thumbs up or thumbs down. I didn't even mention whiteboards. Good point. So that's could be everybody responding at once. They're calculating math problems, writing out a short answer, hold it up above their heads or hold it close to their chest so other people can't see. Share what their partner said. Good. So that's an individual response. Whisper the response to a magic finger. I like that. So everybody's doing something and not interrupting their neighbor. I like that. Choral responding. Yeah, more whiteboards. See Kahoot, stand up, sit down. Yes. And that's a good idea, Howard, because you can show with total physical response, kind of your yes or no, or whatever the options are. Or if you have it set up in advance, maybe you've got like sides of the room or the neutral ground, things like that. That can get everybody participating. Great. Thanks for dropping in the chat. If you think of more, keep them coming. We'll keep sharing those. And of course, you can always download the chat to get these great ideas and take them with you. Thanks, everybody. As Kathleen and Mark reviewed, all of our strategies have a tier 2 grid in the module that you can download, copy, paste into your school's Ci3T implementation manual's tier 2 grid. It defines the support with a description and suggested entry criteria to get you started. You want to customize those to your school site and context, of course. How you might progress monitor, and including treatment integrity, social validity measures, and sometimes most importantly, the exit criteria. As a tier 2 intervention, when you're really focusing on a couple students or a small group of students who really need extra opportunities to respond beyond the rest of the class, there might be a time where that's no longer needed. It's already part of your tier 1, everybody's getting it, you're focusing and intensifying it for these students, this small group, until they reach a certain point. Maybe they're no longer screening in at moderate or high risk on a behavior screener, and so they maybe will be sufficient if you fade that support back to the tier 1 levels. So that intervention grid is there and ready for you to use and incorporate into your implementation manual. As Mark was covering, with all interventions, we want to know, is it working? So examining the treatment integrity. So we've got a checklist in the module for you to use. We want to know what people think about it. Not only the students, but the people who are implementing it. So if I am the teacher, I'm doing it, I'm going to assess my own, how do I feel about the goals, procedures, and outcomes of this strategy. But also I may expect my paraeducators, my education assistants, all the other adults in the room who are assisting in the instruction or specialists who come in, and they're going to be using opportunities to respond. I want to assess their social validity as well. What do they think of it? And ideally, I want to be checking on student outcomes. Are they improving based on my implementation of this strategy? So in the module, you see the graph on the right there, there's a way for you you to collect data in an easy to use Google Sheet or a Microsoft Excel database where you can put your data, it'll automatically graph it, and you can compare in baseline and withdrawal when there is no intervention to the time periods we collect data when opportunities to respond is in place at a high rate. And then on the left there, you see the treatment integrity checklist. So you can measure, am I putting it into place as designed across days? So you can look at for the whole week, how did I do? Or how did I do across the components for the day? In the middle there, there's some examples of adult and student social validity forms that you can download from the module. And maybe not as a standalone intervention, opportunities to respond, but you can use it as a component within Tier 2 interventions. So maybe I found this social skills intervention module on the ci3t.org enhance page, and I'm going to start implementing these social skills as an intervention with my students, and I want to incorporate opportunities to respond as I'm doing that. And that makes sense. If I'm teaching social skills, I'm going to be involving lots of chances for students to be engaged with that instruction. So choral responding, whole group responding, and think, pair, shares, thumbs up, thumbs down, all the things that I would do with that other Tier 2 intervention, so as a component. And similarly, opportunities to respond can be a component within Tier 3. So if I'm designing a functional assessment-based intervention, I'm looking at all the antecedent adjustments, which could include and probably should include opportunities to respond. Because if I'm engaging the student more, keeping them involved and active, then it's less likely they're going to engage in the problem behavior. So if I make that as an antecedent adjustment, then their behavior is going to occur less. Hopefully the replacement behavior occurs more, and then I can reinforce that and no longer accidentally reinforce the challenging behavior that I don't want to see. So I can incorporate OTR as a component of Tier 3 interventions. Let's take a closer look at those 8 steps. It's in a single sheet here that you can download and check off as you go through them. The first one is just to identify common sense, right? When am I going to use opportunities to respond? Now, I want to point out, as you're reading all these materials with this module, it's really geared toward targeting a short period of time, maybe a 10-minute block or a 15-minute block, where you're going to review information that's been previously taught and learned by your students. And therefore, you're able to do a fast-paced delivery, that 3 OTR per minute ideally, to review that information because they already know it. But keep in mind that you can be using OTR throughout the whole day, not just during that 15 minutes. And if you notice there's a particular time of day where challenging behavior occurs pretty regularly or predictably, maybe that's a time where you want to increase and implement opportunities to respond. So in general, just keep that in mind. There's those kind of 2 ways of looking at OTR, throughout the whole day or during this really high-paced, fast-paced review time of information. So first identify what is the context, what is the lesson where you're going to incorporate opportunities to respond. If my academic lessons is that history review of the Golden Gate Bridge, I'm also going to think about, well, what behavior expectations do I need to review? So I'm going to kind of pre-correct for them, reminding them and looking at the school-wide expectation matrix of giving best effort and showing respect as we're listening to others in our discussions and think, pair, shares and everything like that. And for social skills, I'm going to remind them about and incorporate throughout the lesson when we get to it, empathy, for example. We just worked on empathy in our social skills lessons. And when we talk about the 11 men who died when they fell from the bridge, we're going to think about that and discuss that and display our, practice our empathy, as well as being thankful for those that fell, like 19 fell and didn't die. Because of the nets that were first ever used in bridge constructions. Look, you're learning all the, who do you mean you're going to learn some facts about the Golden Gate Bridge tonight? Step 2, you're going to prepare that list of questions. So if I really wanted to do a lesson on the Golden Gate Bridge, I'd have a whole bunch of things ready to go to ask people. Things like what type of art is all the elements and how do I ask that? So is it going to be a true-false question? Like Art Deco were the stylistic elements on the Golden Gate Bridge, true or false? And they're going to show me thumbs up or thumbs down, for example. So I'm going to have a bunch of closed-ended questions, things that have a predetermined response, whether it's multiple choice or a certain word or a certain number, true or false. Or I might have open-ended questions, responses that are not predetermined. So for example, I might say, this question is for an individual, but notice I didn't name a person's specific name yet. I just said, this is for an individual, because I want everybody to be thinking about this question. I want everybody to come up with an answer. So I might prompt, this question is for an individual. Why do you think the Golden Gate Bridge was called the Golden Gate. What does gate mean? Everybody's going to think about it. Maybe they're writing it down. And then I will call on, Stacy, what'd you come up with? So everybody thought about it, everybody engaged, versus if I had said in the beginning, Stacy, this question is for you. What is everybody else going to do? Woo, dodge that bullet. I'm off the hook. I don't need to think about answering this question. So if you're going to call in an individual student, name the name last. Prompt the question. Maybe then I pull my ticket and say, Stacy, what'd you get? Okay, so open-ended and closed-ended questions, I'm preparing those in advance. Then I'm going to determine the modality that I'm going to deliver. Is it just going to be me speaking, just oral presentation? Maybe I'll do some slides so they can see the questions. Maybe there's pictures that represent the questions. Maybe there's multiple choice with the letters A, B, C, D, so they can see those and hold up their response cards. So I got to decide what that is. Back in the day, it was an overhead projector for me. I had that ready to go. All the different transparencies, swapping them in and out really quick. And then I got to determine, how do I want students to respond? Am I going to do the verbal or nonverbal? Am I going to do think, pair, shares where 50-50 is working and trading? Or do I have whiteboards passed out and ready to go? And I can mix and match. I can have whiteboards with everybody. I might do some pre-correction for how to use them appropriately and remind people that they're not Frisbees and we don't hit people on the heads. And who can tell me one way that we use whiteboards appropriately during our history review here? And I may do thumbs up, thumbs down, choral responding, all at the same time, mixing and matching. As long as I've taught them, which is the next step, I'm going to explain to them, and maybe I've done this before, and this is just a reminder, how is this format going to work? I'm going to say this is for everybody, or this is a choral response, or whatever the cue is, whether it's my hands, or I say repeat after me, or I have another signal, or whatever I've determined. So you see the example here. I'm teaching and reminding, when I ask a question, you're going to have 30 seconds to write it on your whiteboard. Then I'm going to do a countdown, and that's when I want you to hold it above your head. Or in some classes, it works better to hold it tightly in front of your chest because students may not want others to see it. So they're kind of hiding it, and only they can see it, only the teacher can see it. And then as a teacher, I can do my quick scan. As I conduct the lesson, I can listen to everybody's choral responding. I can watch people's lips moves to make sure they're all matching and nobody's just mouthing something and not doesn't know what's going on. And maybe that's a person I might pull a ticket, but I know who I'm going to call on because I'm not sure they're fully engaged. It looked like they were faking it before. So I may fake pull a ticket and call their name. But I'm conducting the lesson. If I'm doing that timed short period where I'm really trying to get 3 per minute, counting those, I've got my list ready to go so that I can do that. And think about it, if I'm doing 3 per minute and I'm doing a 10-minute review, that's 30 prompts I got to have ready to go. So plan accordingly. If you're going to have a certain number and you've only got so many, maybe it's a 5-minute quick review and fast paced. That's great. And I'm going to watch how engaged is everybody. If it's less than 80%, if not everybody's doing it, maybe I need to switch up how they're responding, or maybe it's how I'm presenting as well. And then, of course, I want to acknowledge correct answers and say, that's correct. And maybe I restate it to confirm it so everybody hears it. Or if they're holding up their whiteboards, it looks like almost everybody got it right. The capital of New York is Albany. The color of the Golden Gate Bridge is international orange. It's not actually gold, you know. That's right. It is painted every day, nonstop. And then if it's wrong, I say, oh, looks like we didn't get that one. Or if it was an individual, it's like, nope, the capital of New York is not New York City. It's Albany. What's the capital of New York City, everybody? Now it's a choral response. Albany, great. So I can be mixing and matching as I'm responding to everybody's response, giving them the feedback. And then at the end, either that time, every time, or periodically, I want to offer an opportunity to give feedback. Maybe it's a smiley-o-meter for the younger grades. Maybe it's this version of the children's intervention rating profile, where they just have a few questions where they can check them off if they're old enough to do so. Maybe it's an oral if it's a small group, or one-on-one where I'm just asking them the questions and they tell me, or they point on the scale there from 1 to 6 how much they agree or disagree with each question. But they're letting me know, giving me their feedback, because if they aren't enjoying it, they're not liking it, then I'm going to try something else. All right, in the module, you're going to find all those materials and more, lots more infographics and videos that you can share with your faculty and staff. And remember that if you're in Kansas, you can get not only PD credit, but you can double it if you apply it, and triple it if you show impact for it. And if you're in a district where we haven't worked with your PD system and you'd like us to, please connect us with your PD contact person, and we'll see if we can work it out. Maybe sometimes like there's a form for us to fill out to say what's in the content, and then that allows people who attend to get PD credit. For example, here, Jefferson County Public Schools in Kentucky with me nearby. By showing up, I send a list of names and emails, and everybody gets credit for being here tonight. All right, it's down to talk time. And so remember, you can go explore the module, discuss it as a component, opportunities to respond at Tier 1 for everyone, as a standalone Tier 2, or if you're a trainer or coach and want to chat with that group.
Thank you guys for staying and being so engaged. Mark and David, thank you both very much for presenting tonight. And for those of you that are first-time joiners for tonight for Project Empower, we offer these sessions 7 times a year, and they are very similar format. Next time, it is a little different in the sense that we're all focused on one strategy next time. So for the next 3 times, should you choose to come and join us, we'd love to learn with you. The next one is on behavior contracts, and the focus will be on learning about what those are, how they're situated in a tiered system, and people will come and practice writing a behavior contract. So you might come with a student in mind that you think could benefit from that. And then on the 6th time, we're going to talk about direct behavior ratings, which Sandy Shafulius, one of the developers, often refers to us as a twofer because it is an intervention and a progress monitoring tool. And then last but not least, we'll be wrapping up with functional assessment-based interventions. And we hope you yourself will want to come or bring somebody to potentially share that information back. So we'll look forward to the time with you. And in your emails, you will find an evaluation. So if you are willing to fill that out and let us know what you thought about the resources and this engagement opportunity, please know that we'd love to hear from you. And in the meantime, thanks to the great coaches and to Elise for being here and getting everything prepped. We appreciate your time and hope you have a wonderful end to the evening. And for the East Coast people in particular, thanks for hanging out with us in the dark. We'll talk to you soon. Take care, and we'll see you shortly.